A lot of guys may not be thinking about fishing during the month of December, but as I've said multiple times on this channel, when you have cooling water temperatures or even cold water temperatures, it is one of the best times to go out and catch the biggest bass that live in your body of water. You may not go out and catch a ton of fish, but the ones that you catch are gonna be the mondos. They're gonna be the big girls. They're gonna be the ones that we like. So today I wanna talk about 5 lures that I will not leave home without in the month of December, so stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. There is just a few more days to take advantage of the Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals happening at Sportsman's Outfitters. You can save a ton of money on tackle, on hunting gear, and if you are on the market for some rods, there's some great rod deals happening right now. I think there's still some Arc Lancer Pro Series rods that you can get, buy one, get the second for just $19. So if you guys want to help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel, click those links down below in the description. Now, the first lure I always have with me in the month of December is a Texas rig, and more specifically, a punch rig. Now, this technique is not going to apply to everyone. I will get into some techniques and lures that will work for just about anyone, but this one specifically, if you are fishing kind of in the south, especially in lakes that have matted vegetation, this is the time of the year where I pick up that big weight, that big punch rig, and literally do not put it down. A lot of times what you see in the south, you're gonna have all types of matted vegetation. Whether you live in Florida, maybe Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, you're gonna have some matted vegetation. And in these cold weather months, a lot of times bass are going to bury up under this matted vegetation. It actually becomes like a blanket to the fish. And this is by far one of the best techniques to catch really big fish. I have fished a lot of tournaments before that are in December and January and February, where if you can find a bite where you are catching them through matted vegetation, you are going to do really well in that event because it catches really big fish. Now, some of the footage that you are seeing right now is not from the month of December. This is actually me punching just a few months ago here in Ohio, but punching in hot months and cold months is actually fairly similar. I'm gonna use kind of the same overall like rod, reel, line, weight, everything. The biggest thing that I do that is different in really cold months is I really like to hop this bait a lot in that mat that I'm fishing. When I pitch that bait in, it's not just hop it 1 or 2 times and pull it out and pitch it. It's hop it 7, 8, 9, 10 times in the mat. I see this a lot specifically in Florida. I have fished Florida a lot in cold weather months. And there are days where you're fishing mats and you can go behind other guys that are also fishing matted vegetation because they're doing just that. They're pitching in there a few times, bringing that bait out and moving on. And if you keep that bait in there and really just hop it and pump it and yo-yo it in there, you'd be surprised at how many fish are gonna come and get it after the 7th hop, the 8th hop, the 10th hop. So that is a really important factor into getting more bites while punching. Another huge tip when it comes to punching is make sure that every now and then you bring that bait to the roof of the mat. A lot of times bass are gonna be found kind of suspended under a mat or on the bottom, but sometimes they are right up underneath of that mat. If you bring your bait to kind of the roof of the mat and just kind of bang it against the roof of the mat, those bass will actually come up there, pick it off that mat, and swim down with it. It is honestly one of my absolute favorite techniques. It catches big bass, and you gotta have it if you're fishing in December in the south. Moving on to lure number 2, this is a technique and lure that you can fish anywhere. And I have caught fish in the coldest water temperatures, waters in the low 40s, upper 30s, even on this technique. And it is fishing a jig, and more specifically, a very small compact jig. Right here, this is a 1/4 ounce Strike King Bitsy bug, and it's one of my favorite cold water jigs. As you can see, it's really small, and it's also really light. When I fish this specific jig in cold water, I am going to downsize all of my equipment. Usually my typical jig rod is 7 foot, 3 inch, medium heavy, sometimes a heavy power and a fast action. I'm going to downsize a little bit. I typically go with a 7 foot, medium heavy power, fast action. So just a little bit smaller rod. And I'm actually gonna throw this on 12-pound fluorocarbon opposed to a lot of times I'm throwing 20-pound fluorocarbon with a jig. Now, the biggest reason you wanna kind of downsize everything is it is going to get you way more bites in cold water. You have a small jig, smaller line, a smaller rod and reel setup, and I'm telling you what, that will get you way more bites than fishing kind of your typical 3/8 or ½ ounce jig. This is something that literally I always have it tied up. I mean, I have fished ponds this way. I have fished big, huge lakes with bigger fish this way. Now, one of the biggest factors to fishing a jig in December and in cold water months is you want a trailer on there that really doesn't have a lot of action. This right here is just kind of a typical zoom chunk. It doesn't flap like a crawl. It really doesn't have a lot of action. And something that you can do in cold water is overpower a fish. You can have too much vibration, too much action where the fish just kind of shy away from it. So really being subtle with your presentation, like your jig and having a chunk trailer, is going to get you a lot more bites. Now, the chunk trailer is not the only one. I've used like a really small beaver style bait before, like a 3.5 inch beaver, but I really do like the chunk on the back of a bitsy bug. Now, something that applies to not only this jig, but the other lures that I'm going to talk about is when you're fishing in cold water, you typically want a little bit of depth close by. So if you're fishing in a pond, this might be 10 foot of water that's really close by. If you're fishing in a lake, this might be 20 or 25 foot of water. The fish aren't always sitting really deep, but they are typically really close or adjacent to deep water. So keep that in mind when I talk about any of these techniques. Lure number 3 is definitely one that you need to have tied up in the month of December. It is a phenomenal cold water bait, and that is a small swim bait. This right here is a Kitech 3.3 inch swim bait. You know, there's other ones like this one here. This is a Rage Swimmer. I kind of like both of these. The thing that kind of makes me choose the Kitech a little bit more in colder water is that it has just a little bit more action than the Rage Swimmer. Now, the Rage Swimmer is a little bit more durable, so you won't go through as many of them. But the thing about the Kitech is that you're able to fish it slower while still maintaining a little bit of tail wiggle, wobble. Now, the big thing with the Kitech or Finesse swim bait is really fishing it low and slow. I'm gonna keep this bait really close to the bottom, and I'm just going to creep it down there extremely slow. Pretty much I'm going to be making bottom contact most of the time, unless I'm fishing, for example, in a pond where you might have more of a silty bottom. Then I might bring it off the bottom a little bit and creep it a foot or two off the bottom. Now, I fish the Kitech on a spinning rod, typically with 10-pound braid to an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. And the jig head that I use a lot is actually a 3/16 ounce size. If I want to get that bait a little bit deeper, I might go with a 1/4 or even a 3/8 at times, but a lot of times I'm fishing a 3/16. One of the best things about the Finesse swim bait during this time of the year is, although you are fishing it slow, it is a great way to cover water. A lot of times I'm gonna be fishing longer points that might have a big drop off on the end. And for me to be able to cast this swim bait, creep it across the bottom in a couple of areas, really helps me to cover a lot more water than simply fishing like a jig or another slower dragging lure. Now, I use a lot of the 3.3s. I think that's a really good size in cold water. You could probably use a 3.8 or even bigger, but that 3.3, I know it seems really small at times, but it can catch some really big fish. All right, moving on to lure number 4. This is one that I not only have tied up in cold water months, but almost all the time now, because you never know when it's just going to be a Ned Rig day. There are so many days out there on the water where fishing a Ned Rig, especially in cold water like we have in the month of December, is just going to get you way more bites than pretty much any other lure. It's actually kind of annoying sometimes because sometimes I just want to fish something else. I don't want to drag a dang Ned Rig across the bottom, but it's just so deadly. As Alex Rudd says, the deadly Nedly. It is such a good little bait, and you know how good a Ned Rig is. And I really like it for cold water situations, again, because of what I've kind of talked about. It's very subtle. You fish it really slow. It doesn't have a lot of action. So you can get bit in some really cold water temperatures with this bait. This year, the first bass that I caught after the ice came off the lakes was on a Ned Rig. I was in like 38-degree water temperatures. Now, the interesting thing about the Ned Rig is I think a lot of people think of smallmouth or just catching a lot of fish with a Ned Rig, but a Ned Rig can catch some really big ones. I actually fished a tournament a couple of years ago, and a guy in the tournament, Chad Smith, was fishing this little Ned Rig down in Florida on the Harris Chain of Lakes, and he cut a check in that event fishing a Ned Rig like this. So it does catch big bass, especially when you're fishing in cold water or behind other guys. All right, we have come down to lure number 5. This is one that anytime I am fishing December, January, February, I am always going to have this thing tied up, and that is a jerkbait like this. Now, more specifically, in really cold water months, I'm gonna fish the Berkeley Stunna because it actually has a little bit of a slow sink to it. But I talk about this bait and exactly why I like to fish it and how to fish it in this video right here. So if you guys enjoyed this video and you wanna know more about a jerkbait and how to fish it in cold water, click that video right here. Don't forget to comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.